Human resources, human capital, people, and culture. This single vocation has many names. HR professionals are responsible for what is arguably the most critical success factor within any organization. It's talent. HR Studio Podcast brings you bi-weekly interviews with HR executives, thought leaders, authors, speakers, and trend spotters from the world of HR and beyond. Listen, learn, and leverage. Welcome to HR Studio Podcast, building the next generation of HR leaders. HR Studio is brought to you by A.J. O'Connor Associates, a trusted human capital consulting partner to emerging, mid-market, and world-class organizations. For over 35 years, AJO has built its reputation on experienced listening, exceptional quality, and caring partnerships, delivering services in 30 states and 20 countries. To learn more, visit us at ajoconnor.com and be sure to check out our top-ranked HR blog and sign up to receive email alerts while you're there.
Welcome, everyone, to HR Studio Podcast. I'm Linda Halavic, and I will be your host for our conversation today. We are very fortunate to be joined by one of the preeminent leaders, thinkers, and trendsetters within our profession today, and that is Mr. Ian Ziskin. Ian is currently the president of EXec Group, which is a human capital coaching and consulting firm, but also add very experienced CHRO, author, speaker, board advisor, teacher, and coach to his resume. He has also received numerous awards and honors, too many to list here. But today he spends most of his time helping others to develop, to improve their own performance, and therefore the impact on their organizations. Welcome, Ian, to HR Studio Podcast. It's great to have you with us today.
Thanks for having me, Linda. Great to be here.
Yeah, it's terrific. Listen, we're going to have a little bit of a different conversation today. You have recently developed and then hosted a very, very important conference called EXcelerating HR. And I understand you do these every couple of years. They're relatively small from the number of participants, and they're fairly exclusive because you get into some very edgy topics and go very deep. It's that conference and kind of the headlines and learnings that we want to focus on with you today. Is that okay?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, terrific. So before we get into a few of the headline topics, can you share with us how it is you put together the agenda and what you're hoping to achieve in the conference this year?
Yes, of course. The concept for this EXcelerating HR conference started a few years ago with the idea of creating a safe and friendly forum for clients and colleagues of my consulting firm, EXec Group, as well as a couple of other firms of people that I partner with from time to time. The concept basically was there are a lot of conferences out there in the world that HR people can attend. Many are terrific, some are probably not. But generally speaking, they tend to be, come as you are, anybody can come. It's a great way to meet people and network and get some content. But it isn't quite as effective at building an ongoing colleagueship with people that you meet and can work with more intimately. So when we began this process a few years ago, we started with the premise of keep it fairly small. So, for example, this most recent conference that we're going to talk about in a minute had about 80 people there. Okay. Generally, the participants range from chief HR officers to vice presidents of HR to up-and-coming career HR people, as well as consultants and academics. We also have a number of sponsors. This time around, we had about a dozen sponsors that represent a variety of different firms, all of whom are coming to interact, learn from each other, and contribute to something that is free. So I guess you could argue that that's one of the things that
that's great.
Makes it a bit unique, is put this on for clients and colleagues at no cost. Why? Because we want to create this environment of shared learning, but we also want to say thank you for all of the contributions that those same individuals have made to us. Create a little bit of a trend now. It happens about every 18 months or so. Time we do it, people ask us to keep doing it. So I suppose
soon they're going to say do them every 6 months with the speed of change these days. I'm guessing. I hope I don't forecast that on you, though. I know it's an undertaking.
Because with the speed of everything else that's happening, which I'm sure we'll get into in a moment, people want more and more, faster and faster. And at the same time, recognizing that it takes a lot of work to put something like this on with volunteers, dozens of them literally, who contribute to either being sponsors or to presenting and speaking and being on panels at these kinds of events. So from my perspective, 18 months or so in between my recovery period.
Right. I understand completely. How did you set the agenda? I mean, how do you land on a few topics? And then we'll jump into some of them. But I think it's interesting.
First of all, I think it's turned out to be really important that the topics be things that people really want to talk and learn about, right? There are plenty of conferences you can go to where somebody wants to come and present whatever their greatest and latest idea is. May or may not be relevant to the people who are sitting in the audience who have something very specific they want and need to learn because it's relevant in the moment of what they're struggling with or wrestling with as a HR professional. So the content, the topics, the overall themes tend to be driven very much by what we hear in working with our clients and colleagues.
I see. That's great.
Everyday basis, right? And then the other thing, which of course matters a lot in all of this, is making sure that we have people who are willing and able to contribute their thought and perspective and their practices because they're working on these things in the moment, right? It's not just theory, it's they're dealing with them with their clients or with themselves and their own companies. That's generally how we, in a generic sense, focus on the agenda. This particular time around, when we did this back in middle of May, the theme that emerged most significantly was all of the different angles and aspects of dealing with large-scale transformational change. Therefore, literally all of the topics that we address are in that vein, as you'll see when we get into the conversation about it.
Which I think is great. There's a very practical aspect, from my sense, of the conference, as well as a very kind of theoretical and deeper one as well. So it's exciting stuff. So how do you want to jump into it then? I mean, there are so many topics we could drill into. Perhaps we'll do another podcast together down the road. But for today's conversation, Ian, can we talk about the participants' perspectives and needs when it comes to transformational change? All of us as HR professionals today spend a lot of time working and managing change. It was a topic on your agenda. Can you share with us kind of the key takeaways from that particular part of the session? Would that?
I think maybe what I'll do is just take a minute to give you a general overview of the kinds of things we attempted to address, and then I'll dive into a few a little bit more specifically that we can go back and forth on if that meets your needs. Maybe one other thing to set the stage as I explain a little bit more about this, more for your listeners really than for us, which is there are a lot of conferences out there that people can attend. I don't think the point that we're trying to debate right now is about attending conferences. It's really more about taking responsibility for your own development, taking control of your own career. As a coach and leadership development person, as a consultant, I tend to interact with a lot of HR people who are oblivious to the need to take responsibility for their own development, right? And going to a conference is certainly a good way of learning good content, but even more important than that, I would say, is the importance of cultivating a network of people that you can rely on even before you need them. Because it's better to have that network developed and firmly in place before you're in need of reaching out to people for a specific purpose. Now, with all of that in mind, as we put the conference together this time around, because of the heavy emphasis that all HR people are going through around transformational change, that's really the reinforcing theme throughout the entire day and a half experience. So we talked about transformational change from the perspective of chief HR officers, and also executive search people who are responsible for finding and putting in jobs, not the chief HR officers, but also other HR leaders.
Yep.
We talked a lot about it from the perspective of personal, how do I understand fulfillment, for example, as opposed to employee engagement, and what is it that's fulfilling people these days in a way that's much more satisfying and perhaps what we've been able to achieve in the past. We also talked a lot about the future of work in HR, and we'll come back and talk about some of those things in a minute. But there was also quite a bit of discussion about digital, digital disruption in the workplace and its implications for transformation and innovation, and also its implications for careers, how organizations are in fact redefining the notion of career through digital platforms and all kinds of products and services that are out there now that didn't literally exist 5 years ago.
Yeah, understood. So, great agenda. This session was a couple of days, am I right? 2.5 days in duration?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, terrific.
Yeah.
From your perspective, which of the topics you just described did you perhaps find the most energy with the participants? Maybe we start there. The topic that was most poignant, most energetic, if you will. I'll leave that up to you, which one you want to start with.
No, thanks. I appreciate it. Maybe we'll start, if we're focusing on, where there was the most amount of engagement in the discussion, was more around actually the future of work in HR. I think there's a reason for that level of enthusiasm and excitement. One, because the topic tends to lead to questions such as, what's going to be different 10 years from now in the world of work than what I experience today? And the second question is, what do I need to do personally as an HR leader to be ready for and relevant to that world that's evolving? So it's simultaneously exciting because you get to talk about a lot of potential change, but also petrifying because you're spending a lot of time thinking about, am I really going to be able to step up what the world of work needs and expects of me as an HR professional? And I think as people debate this in their own mind and then discuss it with their peers, which we did a lot of at this conference, everybody starts to form their own opinions about whether they really are in fact ready or not. And when they feel ready, they're excited. And when they feel not so ready, they're pretty petrified. So that generated, I think, a lot of energy and excitement about that. So I can tell you a bit more about.
Well, let's hit a few headlines there, if you don't mind, because obviously our listeners are probably in those areas, right? What's going to be and am I ready? Can you share a little bit of the content that came out, or the dialogue, if you will?
Yeah, absolutely. Much of what we talked about is really a culmination of and a summary from about 5, almost 6 years of work that I've been personally involved in, but there have been literally, 100 volunteers of one sort or another who've contributed to various phases of this project, which started out being called the CREATE project, CHREATE, which is a short acronym for a longer name I won't bore you with right now. But fundamentally, what we've been looking at over the course of these years is what are the forces of change that are happening in the external environment, have profound implications for the changing nature of work. So I'll come back and mention a couple of those in a second as an example. But also, what are some of the new capabilities that not only HR leaders, but other non-HR leaders would ultimately need to have in order to be effective in the environment that we're talking about. So here's some things that have emerged from this that we talked about at the conference that might be of interest to your listeners. First of all, in terms of some of the forces of change, a lot of emphasis on the evolution of technology and moving more aggressively toward human-machine collaboration, coming increasingly about automation and artificial intelligence, algorithms. There's a lot of talk out there these days and some anxiety as well about are human beings going to be replaced by machines and robots and computers. Lots of debate about whether, in fact, it'll create new jobs and new industries, which we think it will.
Good to hear for people.
Will it also eliminate jobs and create massive unemployment, which, depending on who you believe, in some geographies and regions and professions, could create as much as 70% unemployment in certain professions. And so you have this massive transformation of the workforce, people whose skills need to transition, play more effectively in a world of robots and artificial intelligence and automation. So that's one particular theme that seems to attract a lot of attention. Other one I'll mention, and I'll just mention one more in the sake of time, around the reconfiguration of work. So work itself becoming much more virtual, much more flexible, and much more of a shift from the traditional employment model that most of us know, where we go to work for a company as an employee, more and more movement toward a world of freelancers and gigs and shorter term projects that people can move into and out of without necessarily becoming a long-term full-time employee of a particular organization. Those kinds of trends, that reconfiguration of work and the way that people choose to work, seem to be huge, and it's become huge. And it turns out, again, for all of our listeners, one caution I would offer for a lot of HR people is, if you look inside of your own organization, most of the HR practices and policies and processes that companies have in place today all anticipate regular full-time employment, where I try to hire you and hang on to you for as long as I possibly can. And while that model is not going away completely anytime soon, it is certainly being supplemented in very substantial ways by people who don't want to be long-term, regular, full-time employees. And most of our HR practices don't really contemplate that very well, don't accommodate the flexibility that's needed in order to do that better, and organizations have traditionally done. So those are the kinds of things that are trends that are beginning to occur, and it has some implications for things we need to be better at. Examples of that would be most HR people I've been around, even though I love the profession and have been in it in one way or another for over 36 years, I find that most HR people's claim to fame is very internally focused. They know their own organization, their own culture, they know the people, they know who hates whom, they know where all the skeletons are buried.
Exactly, I agree.
All very important. But what they don't have, nearly as much as they'll need to have in the future, is a much clearer external perspective on what's happening in the world around them, not only in their own industry, but in other industries and other geographies of the world. So capabilities that are starting to emerge are much more externally savvy and aware, much more multidisciplinary in nature, because many of the problems that we're being asked to solve are cross-functional in nature. They are multidisciplinary in nature, and there's what I like to describe as an orchestra conductor mentality that needs to be developed, which is, how do I go find, as an orchestra conductor would, the very best musicians in the world? I may not personally, as an orchestra conductor, be an expert at playing the flute and the saxophone and the violin and the timpani. My job is to find the people in the world who are the best at that. A similar notion, I think, is that increasingly HR people have to be very comfortable at, let me go find the best people at marketing and data sciences and statistics and other things that I may not be an expert at, but those kinds of capabilities are essential in solving the multidisciplinary problems that I, as an HR leader, are being asked to address. Those are some clear implications of the things that we're starting to see happening with the trends that we're talking about.
So that's a great overview, Ian, of what you all talked about and the kind of trends that you're all seeing out there. I have to ask you, were the participants a little less petrified at the end of the dialogue, or were they biting their nails even a little harder? How did it close, if you will, this particular part
my
of the session.
experience at both the conference as well as my broader life when I interact with HR people on a regular basis, as I do, I think the more information that people have about what's coming, and the more clarity we can offer them about things that you could be doing a little bit better or a little bit differently to better prepare yourself, that creates excitement, and it creates a little bit higher level of confidence in my own personal ability as an HR person to step up and do what's being asked of me. So frankly, one of the reasons why I really enjoy co-hosting this conference is that I feel like people leave with a higher sense of confidence and clarity about what it is they need to be doing than they came to the conference with. And if that, in fact, does occur, I feel like we've created some value for people who are very busy and could have been spending their time doing something else other than spending time with us.
Yeah, no, it's terrific. Terrific point. Can you talk a little bit? I want to pivot to another area that I know you all discussed, which is probably equally as intriguing for our listeners, which is the difference between what we historically know as, years ago, was employee satisfaction, which transformed into employee engagement. And I know that you all talked about the future being something called employee fulfillment. Is that a good question? Can you talk a little bit about how that discussion went and what some of the outcomes were?
Yes, absolutely. This is a really great discussion led by a gentleman who I think you know, Bill Shaman.
Yes, we do.
He's a really good colleague and friend who wrote a book recently. I thought it was a terrific piece of work called Fulfilled. And the principle of this book is really about the evolution from satisfaction to engagement to increasingly now fulfillment. And one of the things he talked about, not only at the conference, but in his book, is this concept of what he calls Lighthouse Goals, which is his way of saying there are stepping stones to achieving the broader, longer-term aspirations that we all have as individuals, whether it be for a career or for ourselves personally. The lighthouse concept being the one of a ship out at sea, generally speaking, is not sailing directly to the lighthouse. What they're looking for in the lighthouse is to provide general direction and guidance to where the coast is, where the rocks may be, where the harbor may be, and the ship makes its adjustments as it's on course. And I think the concept applies really well to managing life and career as opposed to the longer term life goals, right? And so one of the things that came out of this whole discussion on fulfillment at the conference that I thought was really important for people to hear was the notion of bringing balance and your whole life to the workplace and trying to strike this balance between what you're attempting to achieve at work, what you're attempting to achieve in your life, what are you trying to do in terms of taking care of your health, what about spiritually, what about physically, what about emotionally, because there's a reason for this, and a very practical reason for this, which is basically people are burning themselves out, are emotionally and physically exhausted. Pace of change, as we've talked about several times already, is escalating in intensity and in frequency. People are just plain exhausted. And it's really difficult.
Like Thursday or Wednesday,
Exactly. And it's really hard for people to be fulfilled if they feel completely overwhelmed by the pace of change, which a lot of this research in the fulfillment space that was talked about at the conference tends to suggest that people increasingly are feeling overwhelmed, not feeling in balance, feeling under-resourced and underappreciated for what they're being asked to do. That, frankly, this research would say that only 20% of people feel highly fulfilled. And could be, I'm not sure we can ever get to 80 or 90%, but even if we could double the percentage of people who are feeling highly fulfilled, what an enormous impact that would have on productivity and innovation and quality at work, let alone the positive impact it would have on people in their personal lives and society as general. So the movement now, increasingly so, is toward better balance and incorporation of the full person. That, one of the things I love about the concept is it also has great implications in a positive way for diversity and inclusion.
Sure does.
Where for many years the whole diversity and inclusion space really been encouraging people feeling comfortable who they are,
bringing their whole selves to work.
And it's now being further reinforced by this emphasis on fulfillment and some of the research behind fulfillment, so that people feel not only comfortable bringing their entire selves to work, but recognizing that they're actually more effective when they do.
So thank you for that overview. It's an excellent premise. I couldn't agree more with that seeming direction of where we're going. I have to ask you, though, did the conversation get into the dialogue at all between the heads of HR and their CEOs? The CEOs, which are often driven, results-oriented, sometimes no time for what is perceived as health and happiness. I mean, did you guys debate at all the kind of conflict sometimes in the different stakeholders, really, that are leading organizations today?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And part of the conversation was around, like most things, it's a matter of convincing and building a business case, because while you would love every CEO or every senior operating leader to get it, be on your side or agree with that point of view.
It'd be easy, wouldn't it?
It'd be awesome. It'd be certainly easier, but it rarely occurs, right? So, building the business case and providing data as to why making an investment, and this is in fact an investment in trying to create an environment where people are more whole at work, why that's a value, because it improves productivity, because it reduces some of the negative consequences of burnout and exhaustion, be it absenteeism, be it illness, be it lack of engagement, be it, pick your poison. There's plenty of poison to pick. And that there's, increasingly now studies and data showing that organizations that make this type of more comprehensive, integrated investment in people can make a difference in sustainability of not only fulfillment, but energy and what people are bringing to the
workplace. Yeah, it's interesting because it strikes for me, Ian, that one of the things top of mind for CEOs today is innovation, and you can't have an environment, right? It's just not real to expect it to be ready, set, go, innovate. Right? It's environmental and has a lot to do with how people are feeling, and innovation really is an emotive process. So everything you're discussing, right, bringing your whole self to work, would help innovation. I know that you mentioned that. And so you hope that people can make a business case around growing business and growing customer connectivity, all as a function of greater fulfillment at work. I mean, it seems clear, easier said than done, of course, as always. But it sounds like it was a great conversation that you guys had at the conference.
Totally agree with everything you said, and I'm just going to add one additional twist to it as it relates to the innovation piece, which is one of the most difficult aspects of innovation that most organizations I'm around talk about is fear of failure. Trying things that don't work, taking risks, putting yourself out there, and what happens to people when they fail. And a lot of organizations, unfortunately, have this long history of people who try and succeed are heroes and people who try and fail are failures. And the failures aren't well received. People who fail don't last very long. And organizations that are trying to truly drive a culture and environment of innovation tend to do a much better job, not necessarily of promoting failure, but understanding it as a generally accepted outcome. Trying things that are extraordinarily new and difficult. The connection back to this fulfillment conversation is really all about trust. If you're not able to create an environment where people feel they can trust each other and you as the leader of the organization, which is a huge part of fulfillment, it also tends to be a major obstacle to creating an environment of innovation, because what do I believe is going to happen to me if I try something and it doesn't work.
Right.
The way I tend to guard against that is I don't take very big risks. I don't try particularly new or creative or different things because it, at least in my mind, helps me minimize the risk of looking foolish or failing, but it completely robs the individual and the organization of the type of innovation that is necessary to lead transformational change.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's great. You know, it reminds me, I don't know, I think it might have been Albert Einstein, I think he said, I didn't fail 10,000 times. I just found those ways that it didn't work.
So there are many of them, but every once in a while you find a way that really does work. And so learning from the process and from the experience and experimentation, trying things to see how they work, it turns out to be non-trivial. It also is, going back to the conversation we were having a few minutes ago about the future of work in HR, another good example of capability that needs to be resident within HR people as well, because we're not necessarily a profession that's extraordinarily well known for experimentation, trying new things, testing stuff out, seeing how it works, and being okay with failures and learning from those and then moving forward with fewer mistakes and better ideas. It's just not something that the profession has been great at. We need to be better at it.
Yeah, which is it's profound, really, to me. The shift in our skill sets and the level of agility and kind of multi-dimensional, capabilities and competencies that we need to build and to house in order to be our best and bring our best to our workplaces and our culture. So. Great overview, Ian. Listen, we could talk, I'm sure, for another 2 hours, but in the interest of time, I guess I wanted to ask you one more question specifically around these two areas that we just talked about. Are there any aha takeaways in either of these two areas that your participants left with, around either fulfillment, transformation, either of those?
Yeah, I actually think there was one in particular that cut through almost everything.
Okay, great.
Focus on that one for a minute, which is don't wait for divine guidance and permission from above or somewhere else, right? If you want to play a relevant role in transformational change, whether it's about fulfillment, whether it's about leading a change initiative in your organization, whether it's about being more relevant as the nature of work continues to evolve, you've got to lead. Your job is not just facilitate. Your job is not wait for permission. Your job is not just to try to persuade other people that they should do something and then stand on the sidelines and cheer them on, even though that type of support, I'm sure, is helpful. The role that HR people are being expected to play in all of these things that we're talking about, and many that we haven't talked about, demonstrate a connection to knowing what the business needs are, understanding the value chain by which the business makes money, recognize that in order to help facilitate those things in a more effective way, you've got to be out there, out front, leading and driving the change, not waiting for somebody else to tell you that it's okay.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Thank you for making it so clearly. I would add to our listeners as well that this is a decision. Every day we get up, we make a decision. What am I going to do with the day? And how am I going to be? And what am I going to bring to the table? So, as your conference, Ian, was all about learning and expanding skill sets and thoughts, as is our personal commitment to our own profession. As you said in the beginning, HR folks are notoriously poor at their own career development. I like to say we are the best shoemakers, oftentimes with a big old hole in our own shoe. So attending conferences, reading, learning, building networks, there is a very, very practical reason to do it, but it's also a lot of fun. So can you talk about, Ian, do you describe, as we close, would you describe your conference in the middle of May was fun? Was there an element fun to it, or was it kind of dire and perplexing and, people were petrified at the future?
Let's see, I may not be the most objective person to answer that question, but I can tell you with great confidence and pleasure that the people who attended described it as fun and energizing and exciting and want more of it. So that's always very gratifying. For me personally, as I mentioned earlier, I've been in and around the profession now for 36 plus years. I'm fortunate to be somebody who joined the profession, maybe fell into it in some strange ways, but as soon as I got into it, realized this was the place for me, have loved it, very passionate about it. So all of the things that we've talked about today, which might have a tinge of reminders for improvement and how to be more relevant, really all comes from a place of love and fun and support for the profession, because I'm passionate about it and have absolutely thoroughly enjoyed being part of it.
Yeah, I agree. Listen, as we close, can you leave our listeners with two things? First, how can they learn more about you, your firm, and the work that you're up to on a day in and day out basis? Because you are a busy, busy guy.
I try to keep busy and out of trouble, which is not always, those two things are not mutually compatible sometimes. Website, www.exgroup.com is a good way to find me.
Yes.
And in terms of anything I can do to be helpful to listeners, I'm delighted to do that. So if people are willing to reach out to me, I'm happy to respond back and see how I can be helpful.
All right. Thank you for that offer. And as we close, I'd love for you to demonstrate for the group literally how much passion and fun you actually indeed do have at these conferences. You've actually written a song called HR Heroes. Am I right?
That is correct, I'm afraid.
Okay. No. This is great. So listeners, please, as we close, listen to Ian Ziskin singing HR Heroes. This is how much fun he has at the conferences he attends. Thank you, Ian, and thank you, everybody, for listening today.